So in this stem, this is the fifth stem, we're looking at the titles and changes to Hatshepsut's royal image over time. Okay, so to be able to really effectively explain Hatshepsut's titles and the changes to her royal image over time, we really need to understand the position she held in society over time. We need to have a good understanding of the different titles that she held and how they changed over time depending on where she was in the time period. And then we need to also be able to articulate how she used images and titles to support her in her role as well, and what the historians think about all of that. So to begin with, we have to remember that Hatshepsut, first and foremost, was the daughter of the reigning king Thutmose I, which meant that she held the title King's eldest daughter. So that's kind of the first thing that we need to really recognise, is that she held that customary title, King's eldest daughter. When she married her half-brother Thutmose II, she then took on the title of King's great wife as the principal queen of Thutmose II. During this time period, if we're going to look at her royal images, we need to remember the fact that she presented herself as a queen, and the royal images that we have of her as of a female queen. We have an image at Karnak of her wearing the traditional vulture headdress of the principal wife, the king's great wife. We also have her original sarcophagus that was created, and her original tomb created when she was a queen, which are all examples of her image, her royal image as a queen, and we see her depicted as a queen with the vulture headdress on her sarcophagus as well, and her tomb as a queen is also not in the Valley of the Kings, but it's where a queen would be expected to be buried. So we have those examples of Hatshepsut as a queen, those titles, as King's great wife, etc., etc. Everything sort of in keeping with queenly precedence. We also have, when she became the regent for Thutmose III after Thutmose II's death, we have the God's wife of Amun title being really emphasised during this period. And you've got the historians sort of Callender and Tildesley saying, because this was unconstitutional, the fact that she was forming a regency, that she was using these titles to really support her claim to the throne. And during the regency, we start seeing the way she's portrayed in reliefs and in statues and inscriptions. We have some historians like Redford and Robbins who really suggest that she was trying to consolidate her position, and she uses her titles and her images during this period to depart from queenly precedence before, during this co-regency period. So what Robbins and Redford are arguing is that she's actually using this time to cement her position, and she's using titulary and also the changes to her royal image to do that. One example of that is the usage of the title Mistress of the Two Lands, which is a feminine version of Lord of the Two Lands, which is what a king would expect to call himself as well. And then on top of that, we also have those actions like commissioning obelisks, which was deemed as not something that a regent should be doing, or a queen regent should be doing. But another example of an image that we have of her is her offering directly to the gods during the regency, which was a kingly prerogative. That's what a king should be doing, is offering directly to the gods, and she's seen as offering directly to the gods. So that's another example of Hatshepsut departing queenly precedence in the way in the changes to her royal image over time during the regency. So then we're moving on to Hatshepsut as the king. So when she joins Thutmose III in the co-regency, she takes on 4 other royal names. So she sort of has her normal name, but she takes on the fivefold titulary of a king, which was expected of all kings during this time period. So she chose Mart Kare as her throne name, and you can see that there. I think and you can see that there here, Mart Kare, true one of the Kara of Ra. Which was, and she was also the first king to include the goddess Ma'at, which sort of gives us a bit of an indication as to what she saw as important in her reign as well. So you can have a look at those different names, and it's probably not a terrible idea if you learn them. You probably only really need to learn the anglicised meaning of them, which are these ones here: divine and her diadems, true one of the god Ra. This one you'd need to know for sure. But the others, if you can learn them, that's all well and good, but the main thing is that you know these aspects of them. We also need to move on and look at her royal image and how she made changes to that over time. And what we do see is that over time she adopts male pharaonic regalia, which means the stuff that a king would be expected to wear, she started wearing. We have in some images of Hatshepsut, we see her depicted as a male and in very masculine form, whereas others she's seen as far more feminine. And what we sort of realise, because remembering that the sources are incomplete for Hatshepsut, a lot of the sources for Hatshepsut have been destroyed over time. What we have is her experimenting over time with the way she depicts herself as sometimes as a man and sometimes a little bit more feminine and those sorts of things, and that has led some of the really early historians or really early Egyptologists who talked about Hatshepsut as sort of mistakenly labelling her as a cross-dresser, whereas the way we interpret it now is that she was justifying, or she was fulfilling the expectation of a New Kingdom king in what she wore and the way she depicted herself. So we have we have an example here. This is the pink seated granite statue from Deir el-Bahari, and we can see here that she's fulfilling the male pharaonic regalia here by wearing the Nemes headdress. This is that Nemes headdress that comes around here. That's the Nemes headdress. If you ever wondered what that thing's called, learn how that is spelt. N-E-M-E-S. So she wears the Nemes headdress of the king, but what we can see here in the way she's depicted is she has very soft feminine features, and you can also see an outline of her breasts as well. So that indicates that she's slim, she's graceful, but she's most definitely and unmistakably feminine. She's not trying to depict herself as a male here at all. However, this is one example of the way she depicts herself. There is another example of the striding statue, which is in red granite of Hatshepsut, and that depicts herself as far more masculine. Her facial features are far more masculine than this image of Hatshepsut. She's seen wearing the Nemes headdress again, but she's also wearing the pharaonic kilt, the Shendit kilt, and she's also seen wearing the false beard. And you can see she's not wearing a false beard here, which is kind of, so she's kind of that's what it would look like, something like that. She's not wearing the false beard in this statue, which is not, this is kind of a blending of sort of expectations of these images of the pharaoh. We've also got other images of Hatshepsut in the red granite sphinx, which is again a warrior pharaoh pose, where they had the head of the king, but the body of a lion, and they were traditionally wearing the Nemes headdresses again, and the false beard too. And we see in the Hatshepsut's red granite sphinx, she's also wearing that false beard as well, but her appearance, her facial features in that red granite sphinx are far more softer and more feminine than they are in the red striding statue. So we kind of see that she's sort of picking and choosing. Sometimes she portrays her facial features as more feminine, sometimes her body, sometimes she's portrayed in a more masculine way completely. We have another one. There's a formal granite statue which shows her depicted as a king, as a male king, and she's kneeling and making offerings to Amun. And that statue is one of the most sort of masculine ones in that she's wearing the male Shendit kilt. She has the Nemes headdress, she has the false beard, and her body is particularly masculine in comparison, and her facial features are particularly masculine in comparison to, for example, this pink granite statue of Hatshepsut. So we have lots of different portrayals of Hatshepsut over time, and it really is, number one, it's really interesting, but it's also important to understand the differences between them and how she did change her portrayal over time, because it was, I suppose, such an unusual scenario. We have one historian, Kemp, who says that as a king, Hatshepsut was depicted and frequently referred to in the text as being of a male gender, because there was really no choice. So it wasn't so much that she chose to be depicted as a male, but she was king, and that's just the way kings were portrayed. There was no other possible way that you could portray a king. That's just how it was, how you showed what a king looked like. So that gives you a bit of an idea of why she would have done that. So the question always comes up, would she walk around wearing this sort of stuff all the time? And the answer is most likely no. The whole point of this was this male regalia is how she needed to be depicted. to be represented as a king. If you were going to be represented as a king, this is what you wore. If you're going to be able to interact with the gods and communicate with the gods, this is how you had to be depicted. So it's very unlikely that that this is just what she wore during the normal everyday life. It's very unlikely that this is what she wore. So one of the main historians that we have in regards to Hatshepsut's image is a French Egyptologist called Tefnin, and he wrote a big book on Hatshepsut statues, La Statuaire d'Hatshepsut, and that work covers a lot of ground. And his argument is that over time Hatshepsut's portrayal became far more masculine over time. So, however, the issue is that the statues that he was actually looking at weren't actually dated. So how we can come up with that argument is a bit confusing, because you'd obviously need to have the dates of when those statues were actually built in order to say, well, over time she's progressively depicting herself as more masculine, and he doesn't have that. Another counter-argument for Tefnin's hypothesis is that at Deir el-Bahari, which was completed quite late in her reign, we have lots of different depictions of Hatshepsut in lots of different pharaonic regalia in different ways too. So some of them are more masculine and some of them are more feminine, and we'd expect that they would have been completed at the same time. So it seems more that she's experimenting with images of herself rather than over time they're becoming more masculine. So that makes probably a bit more sense than Tefnin's argument. So there is a little bit of confusion. Bradley points out a bit of confusion with Hatshepsut in terms of the way she's referred to in the texts. Sometimes she's referred to as a male, as a he, and sometimes she's referred to as a she. Sometimes she's depicted as a man but described as a woman. And one argument is that the scribes didn't know how to describe her. Should they call her a she or should they call her a he? So the possibility is that the scribes just weren't exactly sure how she should be described, what words to use. Sometimes there is even mixtures, he in one line and she in another line. So that would indicate that there is some confusion there, or they're not too sure. So, for example, the divine birth and coronation scenes as a big example, one that you'd imagine she'd want to get right. They show her as a male but refer to her as a female. However, when we look at the military text, they generally refer to her only as a male. So we sort of see that she's experimenting again maybe with when is it appropriate to call myself male and when will I call myself female. One thing that she never refers to herself is as a bull. She never uses that titulary, which was common for the kings. They would call themselves the mighty bull, and she never did that, which is interesting. But she always, we have the argument from Hayes, it's not a bad little statement from Hayes or argument from Hayes, that by portraying herself in the regal and heroic masculine form as a traditional pharaoh, that's exactly what she was. She came to be. Is the masculine and traditional pharaoh. So by portraying herself as a traditional pharaoh, she therefore became a traditional pharaoh. So that's not a bad way to end with Hayes. So there's a bit of an overview. You do need to have examples of this. You must know the differences between her titles over time, particularly the separation between queen, king, and regent. That's super important. You must have some examples of her royal names, particularly Ma'at Kare is important. Mistress of the Two Lands is important. God's wife of Amun is important, and you must know the arguments about her depiction over time, particularly Kemp, Tefnin, Bradley, and Hayes, and also some examples of how she depicted herself. So if you can learn those 4 examples, that pink granite statue, the red striding statue, the formal granite statue, and the red granite sphinx, that's enough to get you across the line. In fact, if you knew all of them and you got a question on this, a 15 mark or a 10 mark question on this, I think you'd be fine.